Hi everyone, welcome to week 4. So this week we are covering theories of democratization, and this is the first week, and the upcoming 2 weeks we'll continue to work on this topic. But the starting point in the literature chronologically is the modernization theory. And according to modernization theory, when we compare societies and their politics, it is kind of a relationship that some societies that achieve some certain degree of economic development will modernize. And in terms of modernization, of course, when they say modernization, we are talking about getting into a new phase in the society. And it all starts with the transition from feudalism to capitalism, really. So basically, we are talking about the modes of production and how the modes of production are changing in the society, which will lead some other important changes like industrial revolution triggered so many things such as urbanization, secularization. All these things are actually included in this big theoretical chunk of which is called modernization. So one of the most important names in this week's readings is Lipset, and Lipset is one of the founders of the modernization and how modernization triggered democratization in Western societies. And basically, of course, the main assumption here is that the reason why some countries started their democratization process earlier compared to others is because they started their modernization process earlier. So industrialization and industrial revolution lead to some significant changes in the societies, and eventually they started to become less religious, more secular in that sense. And their politics also shifted, so people start to get more aware of the problems with the previous political systems and politics in their societies, and that's why they started to ask for more from their leaders, and that's why these countries also started to move towards a more democratic system or model. So Przeworski and et al., so his co-authors, are kind of, they are also structuralists. They are also probably partially in the modernist school, but they have some problems with the Lipset's argument because they are more talking with the data and some statistical analysis, and when they run some numbers, they realize that actually modernization cannot necessarily explain the whole story of democratization, because there are some countries with quite a lot of wealth and the level of modernization which are not necessarily democratic enough. So for instance, the best example I think we can think about is some of the southern European countries, even though economically they are less developed compared to northern European countries. I'm talking about, of course, countries like Spain, Greece, Portugal. So their democratization came much after than the Western European countries. We can also think about some Latin American countries as an example that actually not necessarily fit to this picture. And of course, some Middle Eastern countries that actually have some natural resources and a good amount of wealth, economic development. But we still know that democracy is not necessarily flourished in many of these countries in the Middle East. So these are some important problems of the modernization theory. And in one of the articles, Przeworski and et al., they look at the role of culture. So basically, if it is not economy or structural changes, whether culture can be an answer for democratization. So basically, the question is, the people who are critical of modernization and economic development, they are saying that it is more like culture. So the cultural aspects of a society makes a society or a country more acceptive and receptive of the democratic values and the democracy, the culture of democracy. So this is a big theory, and this is a big assumption. And also, I think the biggest critique of this culturalist approach is that the democracy that we know as of today, they started to come quite late after the Second World War. So the question is, if it was culture, why it didn't start before the Second World War? Because most of these Western European countries already have the same culture. So if they already have the cultural prerequisites that are important for democratic development, so why didn't we see the economic development in these countries before? So this is a big challenge to this approach. And then finally, we have another reading, which is, I think, a more all-encompassing approach. So basically, this is more like the introduction of the book. The author is Theoral. So he argues in this very important intro section of the book, compares different approaches to democratization. So structural approach, and then strategic approach, social forces tradition, the economic approach, and then finally Theoral argues that instead of just using one of these explanations and theories, why can't we come up with a more theoretical, eclectic approach that actually uses the strengths of all these approaches and try to explain why some countries democratize and others don't over a certain amount of time. So the structural approach is this week's approach, basically modernization theory and the economic most of the economic explanations, earlier economic explanations are part of this approach. So basically in this one, the main argument is that a certain level of economic development is a must for a country to democratize. And then of course you can find so many singular cases that do not necessarily fit this story. India comes to my mind. So India economically much less developed compared to Western democratic systems, and still it's not a perfect democratic system, but especially under Modi. But right now we can say that India is relatively democratic with this small and low level of economic development. The second thing that we can look at is the strategic approach, which is more focusing on the agents and their preferences. So more like elite-driven approach here, we can say. So basically, in this approach, the argument is that it's neither structure nor culture, but it's more like the power dynamics between the economic elites. And then what kind of strategic approaches they have, they're the self-interested political elites, whether they are on the side of the democratic change or not. And then we have other approaches such as social forces traditions, more like historical sociology. They look at the relationship between different social classes and how these relationships really affect in the long term, of course, the democratization and the political system, the future of the political system. So basically there are three social classes in this approach: the peasantry or the working class, and then landlords, and then the bourgeoisie, the middle class. And of course this approach also brings and opens a very important discussion in the literature, saying that one of the most important prerequisites of the democracy is a strong and relatively high percentage middle class. So as you can see, all these approaches are focusing on the prerequisites or the requirements of certain characteristics in the societies. So I try to make a very short summary of this approach and the readings, and next week we'll continue to talk about different approaches, and I hope you can have a good discussion this week about this topic. I'm looking forward to read your discussion post. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.